Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER Pod. I'm your host, Faye, and each week I bring you stories of Jewish women who are trailblazers. This week's trailblazer is Yael Trusch. Yael is the host of the Jewish Money Matters podcast, and she's empowered thousands of Jewish women and couples to transform their finances in a way that aligns with their Jewish values. You might be asking, what does money and finances have to do with Judaism? Well, I had that same question. In this episode, Yael takes us on a deep dive into this fascinating intersection, explaining why aligning financial practices with Jewish values is so crucial. If you're ready to rethink your approach to money through a Jewish lens, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Yael, welcome to the TrailBLAZER Pod. Thanks for being here. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's such an honor because I've been following your content for a while, like on LinkedIn and Instagram, so I'm so glad to be able to do this. I like to start off with all my guests by asking them about their childhood, and I read that you were an only child, so I'm curious how that impacted and shaped you.
I don't know any different, and I'll tell you one thing. I'm a mother of four, and
Wow.
I always marvel at my kids' relationship as siblings.
Oh.
That's because I never had it. It's such a beautiful thing to me, and I appreciate it possibly a little bit more than some.
Yeah.
I'm so used to this concept. So that's one thing that comes to mind. It's a different way of growing up. It's quieter. You could say there's a little bit more of a tendency to be self-centered. I am not going to deny that. It's something.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that I've worked throughout my life. I definitely see the benefit of growing up with siblings in a bigger household. So I don't know that it would be ideal. It obviously was not my choice for my children, but it is what I got, and I'm very appreciative. And I had wonderful parents, and I did have an incredible upbringing and a very happy childhood and a very happy adolescence. And I grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in Puerto Rico. Everything was
amazing
and beautiful and joyful and friendly, and there's like a lot of warmth. And so I only have really good memories of growing up. I do remember as a younger child wanting a sibling. So I do recall that, but it was just not what it was. But I do have beautiful memories of my childhood.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because as children, if you have siblings, we all wish we're the only child, right? Because we want all the attention for ourselves. But if we're the only child, we wish we had a friend. I think the grass is always greener when you're a kid, right? Something that I read about you is that you're like an introvert turned extrovert. Do you think that being an only child affected that?
So it's funny you asked that because I was just thinking about that in terms of that condition of not having people around you. There's one thing that I really developed very well, and it was like the ability to make very solid friendships and be invested, but it's still in a healthy way. I never had really issues with boundaries, but really I have a very, very good friends, very quality relationships, and being able to intuitively make those relationships, just know how to make those relationships. I think there's an element of my growing up perhaps more attuned to, not so distracted by noise, maybe. There's something to that makes me very in tune with people and human nature. And maybe that's counterintuitive because one could argue maybe an introverted person doesn't have the social skills. I think I did develop very good social skills. But yes, I am an introvert. I don't know that I'm an introvert turned extrovert. I don't think I'm an extrovert in any way. I'm a social introvert, meaning to say that I am very good with social interactions and social relationships, but I definitely charge with quiet and with time to myself. And it definitely is very draining to me to be with a lot of people and with people. So as much as I can enjoy it, and it's very interesting because I'm a public speaker, which puts me in a position to be on stage and to talk to people. And I love it. Like, it's one of my favorite parts of my career. And I found that many public speakers are actually introverts, which it's a little bit counterintuitive. So I don't think it's been a handicap. It just, there is strength to introvertedness, and I fully appreciate it now more so than when I was younger, because I will tell you, growing up in the culture and society that I grew up in extrovertedness was so much more valued. And I always felt as an adolescent and young adult that if I wasn't part of the party and part of the thing, it was it wasn't a good thing. And I overextended myself in many ways that I probably,
Wow.
yeah, that I know there were many, many times in my life that I was literally depleted, but because that was the expected thing to do. And back then, there was no concept like we have today of
Right.
speaking about like introverts and extroverts. Like, if you don't want to be part of the life of like, we don't part of it, something's wrong with you.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like this is, we're a social crowd. This is Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
and even I went to college in the United States, and even in the States, all my friends were Latin, so it was like a very big thing. I think if I had known that it's okay to take a step back and recharge, it would have benefited me in many ways. So now as an adult, I know a lot more about it, and so I really appreciate. I nurture that part of myself, and I appreciate that part of myself, and I try to use it to my advantage rather than it becoming something that ends up, hurting me or whatever.
Wow, like you really just blew my mind because I never thought of extrovert versus introvert in terms of like cultural context. That's a really interesting like conversation. And I also like when I grew up, I thought introvert meant shy and extrovert meant not shy, and that's totally not what it means, right? And I
Yeah.
think like the older I get, the more I realize I'm also kind of an introvert. My battery drains so fast. I love being around people, but like oh my God, at 8 o'clock, I need to be alone. Like, please,
Mhm.
everybody, leave me alone. And I think the more people talk about it, the more we realize what it really means. And there's actually nothing wrong with it. It just means how do you recharge? Some people recharge by being around people,
Exactly.
right? So I
Exactly.
think that's very interesting. I want to ask you about your journey towards Jewish observance. Can
Yeah.
you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Absolutely. I was living, well, let's see, when did we start? At some point in my career, I was living in Miami, and I had just moved to Miami from a, a time working in Wall Street. And then from Wall Street, I went to work
Wow.
firm, but in Latin America. And I think that time in Latin America, again, kind of helped me get back to I'm a person who needs a little bit more quality time, more downtime. I don't need to be on 24/7 and
Yeah.
producing and and it made me rethink a lot of things about what kind of life I wanted to live. That's, I think, a little bit of the starting point towards maybe
Interesting.
looking towards a more meaningful spiritual life. So I think that kind of like set the ground, although I was always as a child very spiritual, and it was a little bit the joke around. When I came back from Argentina, I decided I'm not going back to Wall Street. I took a job in Miami, and I moved to Miami. So I was already primed to have a little bit of more space to discover
Yeah.
myself, right? And so that set the stage for, I got a funny phone call from a friend of mine who's not even Jewish. She called me at work on a Friday, and she said, what are you doing tonight? I said, well, I'm going to go to the synagogue, like by my house, and then whatever, do you want to catch a movie? I used to stop at this conservative shul that was on Brickell. I lived on Brickell Key, and I would stop for Kabbalah Shabbos, and then, and so I said, maybe you want to, like, let's do something low key. And
Yeah.
she, you're so funny. I have another friend like you. He likes that Jewish stuff. He like keeps kosher and whatever. So and a few days later, this friend of hers calls me, and what came out of that friendship was that Harry said to me, he's Colombian, Harry Darcy. He said to me, Yael, you just came into town. In my apartment every Tuesday, we have a Torah class with the rabbi.
Oh,
Be in Bogota, and all the Latins come, so you should totally come because so you meet the crowd. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
of course, and that was it. I literally went,
Wow.
and I went to class, and it was with a Chabad Shliach who became my rabbi, who is now in Miami, who had come from Bogota. And I absolutely loved it. And I kept coming back. And I became very close with his wife, Hindi, to the point that one day I said, Hindi, maybe one day I'll do the whole Shabbos thing. I used to
Yeah.
for dinner and this and that or whatever. And she's like, I'll do, I told her, maybe I'll do the whole, the whole full, 25 hours. And she says, anytime you want. I said, okay, what about this Friday? And she's like, sure. And I went that Friday, and I never left. I literally never.
Wow.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
an interesting story.
It was hard because then again, even though we just said I was an introvert, I am an introvert. I was a very social person. Like, I had a very active social life as well, work life and social life. So you start keeping Shabbos, and all of a sudden, like, the first few weeks, like, your voicemail is like packed with calls. Like, where
Are you alive?
are you live? Like,
Yeah.
like, we're doing something to, like, where are you? And slowly but surely, then by, 10, 12 weeks in, it's like, there's two voicemails. Like, I got the message, okay, she's totally, like, not available.
Wow. That's amazing. I haven't heard a story like that yet. I've had some interesting like I remember talking to somebody and she says, I don't know how or when it happened, which is also very, I think it's natural. Not all of us can pinpoint a moment, but I think you're the first one to have like a story where you know like how that shifted for you. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and it was a lot of changes. It involved a lot of changes. So again, this is just the beginning, the
Yeah.
starting, definitely, and also, you know, rethinking relationships and friendships. And there's people who stay with you through the journey, and there's
Yeah.
people who don't. And then you make other friendships, and you grow in different, ways. Then I moved to New York, which I didn't really want to do because I was scared now that I was keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher and had a kosher part. Like, how was I going to do this thing? But I had gotten a scholarship to do my master's. And I told my rabbi and my red sign, I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not going. I can't leave. Like, I didn't know how would I do this. And they're like, no, 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 you're going. You
Wow.
have to finish what you started. You applied for this before. You're going to be fine. You just go. You're going to be fine. And I was fine. Thank God. I mean, it worked. It was
Yeah.
challenging, but it
Yeah.
was, they were right. You could do it.
Yeah, I feel like that can be a whole other podcast episode where you talk about the changes in basically when your identity shifts, right? Which is kind of what happens with religion. Everything in your life shifts, your friendships, your relationships. I think like that's a really interesting topic. We don't have time for it today, but I think it's such an important thing that people need to talk about because it's not just about religion. I think it's when you make any choice in your life that's like values driven or purpose driven that maybe not everyone aligns with. Not everyone grows with you, right? And it's a hard thing to navigate. But I appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's really interesting because it then ties back to Jewish money matters and all that stuff, which we're gonna get into second. But first, I want to ask you: you've lived in I can't even count. Buenos Aires, Shanghai, Jerusalem, Boston, New York City. I have it written down here. Miami, all these other places, right? And you grew up in Puerto Rico. Now you live in Texas. The list doesn't end. But I'm curious, like, how has this diverse background, and now it even extends to not being observant and then, going into the more observant community. How does that influence your perspective on money and culture?
No, that's an interesting question. I never thought about it like my perspective on money, definitely on culture. I mean, definitely, it definitely broadens your mind, and I'm very comfortable with people from many different
Yeah.
backgrounds, because by virtue of the fact that I've traveled so much and I lived so many places, and I've been able to adapt to being in so many cities along the way. And with regards to money, I don't know. It's a great question. I think it probably makes me a little bit more in tune to
Hmm.
how money is perceived in different cultures, and how also there's commonalities in the way we relate to
Yeah.
money in that regard. And I can tell you, even as a person who grew up in a more Latin environment and with many Latin friends, even though like Puerto Rico is American and whatever, so it's a little bit more Americanized. There's definitely things that affect, I guess, money, which have to do with more like family centeredness,
Hmm.
and the roles of male and female, which are very similar to, I
Yeah.
guess, in Judaism. So there's always a little bit of that. I wonder how much my travels colored my own perspective on money. I'm not sure. I'd have to like dig.
That's fair enough. Yeah. So I grew up in Borough Park, and I just remember even meeting people who were Sephardic or grew up in LA versus Brooklyn or Boston. We all had a different way of how we saw money, and it's a lot based on family, right? And so I know, I also don't know how it affected me, but the same way the extrovert introvert kind of like it's affected by culture and it affects culture. I think money does the same thing.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, even, and I don't know that this is so much from my cultural experience as much as it is from my work experience and kind of exploring these topics. There definitely is a difference between the way the Ashkenazi world and the Sephardi world perceives money.
Yeah.
As a Latin woman, even though I'm not traditionally Sephardi, it definitely colors that. And I think there's more of a healthier relationship with money, on the Sephardi side, and I think the Ashkenazi side, we deal with a lot of baggage. And there's a whole podcast we could do on that itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of um, poverty equals piety. It's a very Eastern European,
Yes.
by virtue of the things that that population had to experience,
Right.
which we don't find in the Sephardi world.
Interesting.
That colors a lot of the way we obviously think, talk, and behave around money.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. So you did mention your career. So you had extensive education and like your career in finance, right? And I found it interesting and I love that you were open and vulnerable about your personal experiences. To quote you, you were pretty much helpless when it came to handling your own money. So
Yeah.
first of all, thanks for being open about that. I think it's such a taboo topic. Why do you think that was?
Well, I guess now we can actually tie it back to culture. I grew up in a world where definitely, even though we were supposed to be assertive and educated and all the things, we weren't given the tools to
Mm,
really understand money. Maybe there was that underlying expectation that there was this Prince Charming that was going to get take care of everything.
interesting.
Look, even when I remember being a young adult, and I remember again from my same mother who encouraged me to go all out and get the master's and the career and all the things, and she was actually she is a very accomplished attorney herself. I remember
Wow.
stuff just like when you're dating, like don't don't be so don't talk so much. Don't back your lashes a little bit more, like, and it's like, can I just be me?
Interesting.
So then so going back to money, I don't. There's that, but by the way, I've heard from many other professionals that, in the definitely females, okay, whether they grew up in Latin America or not, many who've grown up in the States who had the same experience. Just by virtue, there is now not so much. The tides are changing,
Mm-hmm.
but there is this underlying understanding that the boys get taught these things, the women don't necessarily. So you could be a very sophisticated person in the corporate world or in the finance world and still not really understand
Right.
personal finance. But it's not even the understanding of personal finance. It's more, you don't know the mechanics of it.
Right.
And then more so when it comes to the mindset, and maybe you don't really understand how emotionally charged money might be for you. So there's a lot there. And I think I was definitely an avoider. I was definitely like, just this will get
Mm.
taken care of, and somebody will come and just take care of it. So even though I could, work in multi-million dollar transactions, I would, my credit card statements would pile up.
Right.
Things that are so ridiculous. Like, why would anybody do that, right? Like, I remember my father telling me when I was a young adult, you have to have a budget, and I'd be like, well, how? Like, what?
Wow. Yeah.
What are you asking me to do? Because I've never done that. I was never expected to do that, and now I've been
Yeah.
told to do that. I don't even know how to start. And of course,
Wow.
internet, not no chat GPT back then. Right? So it was more like an annoyance. Like, what is my father
Yeah.
saying to me? I need to have a
Wow.
budget.
I think it's always easier to do things for others. Like when things are separated from you, it's easier to do it because it's objective and it doesn't have a personal stake. But when
Yeah,
it comes to, it's kind of like, they say like every therapist has a therapist, right? It's kind of
yeah.
like that. Like just because your profession and your career is about something doesn't mean that the application in your personal life, it doesn't work like that.
I mean, I have friends, I have colleagues. I remember a conversation on the podcast with Joe Salihai, who was a money manager, and he shares how he didn't know how to manage his own money, which is even more shocking. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
to what you're saying. And I think with money also, because again, it's so much more than the numbers and so much more than the spreadsheet. It really kind of involves like going deeper and
Yeah.
understanding how you actually think about this, and that's I think harder work.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about the financial loss you experienced? You were married at that point, right?
Yeah. So it was more, I think it was like a general crisis in general. And we had moved to Shanghai, and we were like we could call it on top of the world just to dramatize the story. But like,
Mm.
everything was going fine. And you're too young to remember this, but something happened in 2008. There was a big
I
stock.
remember. I remember.
Okay,
Oh
so
yeah.
it wasn't pretty, and it impacted many things. And my husband was in real estate development, and we weren't immune to what happened. And we
Yeah.
also put a lot of our savings into a company that didn't pan out to do what it needed to do, perform, because of what had happened in the global
Yeah.
economy, US economy, but it trickled down to what we were doing, outside of the US. So it was a kind of a little bit, it had global repercussions, let's say. So that financial loss, really what did to me was it gave me a wake up call to what is this relationship with money?
Yeah.
But it was more because all of a sudden it became a sticking point a little bit in my marriage, because it
Mm.
was the first time that I had to hear the word no, or there's,
Ah. Wow.
All your, you know what I mean? There were all of a sudden these boundaries that I didn't
Yeah.
know how to deal with. And going back to how I started, possibly as an only child,
Mm-hmm.
it was also very difficult to hear these things,
Yeah.
right? So, the way we grow up, why am I now hearing a no? So you can turn into a 7-year-old and you can be completely irrational, right?
So interesting.
It was really my wake up call. And I thankfully had the maturity to understand, and I
Wow.
was thanks to my Judaism at that point, had shaped me enough to understand the value of marriage and the importance of marriage. And I knew I'd worked so hard on myself, and I refined myself to such an extent to find such a fine partner. I wasn't just gonna I wasn't gonna let
Yeah.
something petty as money to come in between. I had the maturity to know that those things happen to people, and I wasn't gonna be one of them.
Wow.
I was not going to be a statistic. When they
Yeah.
say like divorce is the number one cause of
Yeah.
divorce,
Yeah. I'm not gonna be that. Yeah.
I, I'm not going to be a
Yeah.
statistic, basically. So I'm going to figure this out. And
Wow.
thankfully, I realized that it wasn't so much the finance. The finance part is actually the easier part, believe it or not, like I said before. But what really moved the needle for me and my husband, and he also has a training in education and a professional training in finance, what really moved the needle was actually tapping into Jewish wisdom and really looking at the way Judaism informs money. And I guess throughout the time that we were already over a decade, both of us observant, even though Judaism, we understood, informs every area of our life, for some reason that hadn't translated into money and money mindset and my behaviors with money. And once that started clicking, it's when really everything started to turn around for the best. So I always say, like, really, it was a Jewish journey that kind of saved my money.
Wow. Okay. I want to ask you why you chose to be open about this.
Why did I choose to be open about this? Well, because before Jewish Money Matters as we know it today, I had a blog. Remember, there was a day when
Yeah.
blogging,
Yeah.
it wasn't blogging on Instagram, right? I had a blog, and the days of podcasting had started, although not definitely not in the Jewish world. But all of 2016, I was like an avid podcast listener. And but 2015 and then 2016, I had the idea, I'm for sure, I need to start a podcast. I like this too much. And I said, how could I translate what I'm writing on the blog, which basically this blog was all about Jewish lifestyle. It was a Jewish lifestyle blog and how everything in Judaism informs everything in our lives. So it was like, how do we reflect Judaism in our fashion, in our interior design, in how we educate our children, in our businesses. Like it was a lifestyle blog, and it was really very beautiful. It was called Jewish Latin Princess, and had a very strong following. And I was like, how do I translate this into a podcast? So I said, I'm going to start interviewing the most uniquely talented Jewish women of the world, and it was great, and I had a lot of fun doing that. But what happened throughout that journey is that both the blog and the podcast took me to a lot of stages. And the more I spoke and the more I gave workshops to women and stages, talks in different stages around the world and got exposed to the issues that women were facing, I understood very clearly that there were 4 major issues that Jewish women were dealing with in particular. Number 1, their relationship with body image and food, their relationship with their children, parenting, their relationship with their spouse, like marriage, intimacy. And number 4, the relationship with money, finances. So I have nothing to say about food and body image and all that. I'm a pretty good mother, but do I really want to talk about parenting the whole day? Oh, it's okay. I've had my ups and downs, and maybe there's something there. Now, money, not only do I have a professional background in it, but I definitely have my downs that actually affected my marriage. I have a lot to say about this. And what I started noticing is that people did not know what I had discovered with my husband. People didn't have an understanding of how Judaism can shift that relationship with money to become a really positive one. And not only with money, but that could translate into your relationship with your spouse then as well. So I realized nobody's talking about this. And more scary, people are going to non-Jewish people and people of faith in the non-Jewish world also to go through this transformation. And I was like, no, like we have it.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to go to so-and-so. I'm not going to say names, right? Like we have it. And so I started to dipping my toes a little bit. And I gave us a talk. I was part of a speakers bureau for Momentum, and they had me make like an 18-minute TED talk. For like my final, let's say like passing the test or whatever. I flew us to Baltimore and we're going to deliver the TED talk. When I sat down to work on it, my husband told me I wasn't going to do it about money. He's like, what are you going to write? I'm like, well, I have so many speeches. I'm just going to take something. I'm going to make an 18-minute TED talk. He's like, no, you've been wanting to talk about this for so long.
Wow.
You need to do this. And it was
That's a great partner.
Yeah, he's amazing. It was the hardest speech I've ever written. But it was literally, it became the pillar of everything I do. It became patient, and it was like an amazing 18 minutes. You could hear a pin drop at the end. Everybody loved it. Everybody had so many questions. Momentum loved it. They encouraged me so much to continue on this path, and it really just paved the way. And then I pitched a column to Chabad.org, and so I started writing the Jewish Money Matters column, and then this thing led to and then eventually I grew this so much, and I started teaching online courses when COVID came. Eventually I realized the Jewish Latin Princess brand needs to shift, and everything needs to be Jewish Money Matters because that way I'm going to be able to serve more people. I can't just do this as a side thing, and you know what I mean? So then eventually I just rebranded the podcast and stayed.
I always love when people are vulnerable, but personally I know how scary that is. So I respect it so much, but I'm also always so curious, like what made a person choose to be brave enough to do it? So I really was asking that question for me personally.
Right. I'm not an advocate that we have to share everything, but I think if there's something in your experience that you see the world needs, like that challenge was given to you for you to help others. And very often that's the case. And everybody again has to ask their mentors or whatever, but in a sense, very often it comes from a very selfish place, a place of ego to keep it to yourself. And allowing yourself to become vulnerable can save worlds. And it's so gratifying. Thank God, because I've saved marriages, I've saved, women. Like it's been a very, very rewarding work, and it doesn't feel like work. It really doesn't.
Wow. I like how you just rephrased that for me. I'm going to think about that.
I think everything in life is about how can I serve God's world better. And so if you see that there's something in you that is a point where you've had an experience or you have something to give to the world, it doesn't even have to be a challenge, anything, right?
Yeah.
This is what we're here for. So how can I help the world today? And I knew that this was a way that I could really be of impact and help many people.
And look what it turned into, right? Which is amazing. What does approaching money the Jewish way mean? Like why? And I'm asking this because not everyone, not all my listeners, not all my guests are religious, right? There's one theme, we're all Jewish, but can you explain what that means? Like, why do you have to approach it specifically from a Jewish way? And I think this connects very well to our previous conversation about how culture and money kind of work together.
Yeah. So I'll give you something very interesting. I think, and I don't think we necessarily realize this, but we've been exiled for many years. Okay, it's just part of the Jewish experience.
Yeah.
Observant, less observant. That's just part of the Jewish experience, right? This experience of exile. That something is missing, and virtue of that, this influx of influences that are not Jewish influences, they're just the influences of other ways of thinking and approaching life. And that has creeped into our lives in the way we do business, in the way we dress, in the way we think about relationships, about marriage, about intimacy, parenting. I mean, in so many ways. Yeah. Sometimes it's very subtle, but sometimes it becomes very obvious, especially over the long term, right? Yeah. You start seeing what going down that path, kind of the results. The same thing is with money. We tend to have ways of thinking about money, speaking about money, and behaving with money that are not necessarily Jewish ways. When we get to the truth of it, we realize that there is a Jewish approach to this. And I'll give you 3 fundamental examples that anybody, whether they're observant or not, can relate to. Okay? Number 1, normative personal finance says that there's 4 ways that we allocate our money. We can save it, invest it, spend it, and give it. And that last one is last by design. After all those things, if you're a generous person and if you have money left over, of course, you give, right?
Yeah.
Judaism comes and turns that paradigm on its head,
Right.
flips it on its head. We give first.
Right.
And there's a mitzvah to give meiser, and let's not even get to the fact of the financial wealth that comes with it, but this idea that we give first and all the benefits that come with it. Okay, I'm writing my first book on this topic, so I'm
Oh,
very,
exciting.
very,
Okay.
very, very fun. And so just that, okay, it changes everything
Yeah.
about the relationship. And by the way, many people don't realize God is so generous and so wise, okay? Just like he tells us, pull a minimum of 10% from your profit, from your earnings, and separate it aside for the needy as meiser. Just like he trains you to do that, because this is something that we're supposed to be doing. I mean, I teach my children to do it since the first time they start getting money, right? Just like he did that habit is exactly what trains you then to be able to pull out that 10% and put it in your investment account. Hello, all the things that I as a secular girl wasn't doing, right?
Right.
So, do you understand? Even though
Yeah.
I know the importance of doing it, right?
Yeah.
So there's such a beauty and such wisdom. And this is even aside from the fact that you're going to be wealthier by doing it. And by the way, economists have proven that you're going to be happier and you're going to be healthier. I mean, it's a whole topic. Okay, so that's number one. So that just knowing that, okay? Number two, I once read an article, I want to say it was in the Wall Street Journals, but don't quote me on this, okay? It was one of these about like money being the number one cause of divorce, whatever. And it said something to the effect of divergent values amongst couples is what causes the tension. And I was like, oh, this is such an interesting point. So it's really not the money, it's the values. It's what's underlying. What's my value system? And it got me thinking, 1 second, this is Judaism 101. What are my values, right? My values should be informing my financial decisions, meaning to say my money needs to be advancing my values. What is of the essence to me, right? Like from a soul level and to my partner. Like what are the values of this family that we want to advance throughout our lives? And then the harder question becomes, is our money financing those values? Wow, like these are important things. This is living a Jewish life, okay? Because the money is not the end. The money is a means to what? To serve God in this world, right? But those values are going to help you make financial decisions and make financial trade-offs. So that money needs to be in alignment with those values. And very often, secular or more observant, we're living a life of misalignment. And by the way, I've had conversations with even non-Jewish people who tell me the reason people are not happy with their money is actually because they're not financing their values. They're not clear on what their values are. They don't have that mindfulness. And Judaism comes in and says, no, this is important. Give it attention, but give it the right attention. So I always tell couples, just like I told you before, make sure that you're giving first, like you're following that paradigm. Sit with your spouse and have what I call a money date. Have that experience regularly of talking about what you want your money to do for you guys, right? Another thing is the foundation of it all. Like I call it the foundation of the Jewish foundation of money, and that's exclusive reliance in God, the creator, the source of all the money. It's called bitachon. Without that foundation, we can build the most sophisticated financial systems. It really doesn't matter. It's going to be standing on a very weak base. It's meant to collapse at some point. So that is the fundamental for every Jewish individual, to know that yes, we're going to be involved in the world, but it's a puppet show and we're going to do it very, very well. We're going to perform very, very well in that world. But we're not going to give it credence. We're not going to give it credit. We're always tied to the source of it all. So it's not my company. It's not my clients. It's not the economy. It's not the president. It's not my credit card. It's God Almighty. And when a Jew goes out in the world with that mindset, that reliance, the emotional attachment to money is so different. We're not tethered emotionally to it. So we can handle the ups and downs. Then imagine how well we can do also in our marriage, because if we're strong in our bitachon, then we don't let this thing affect our relationships, and we don't let it also affect our relationship with our children. We don't overwork ourselves and neglect our families. I mean, there's so much here, right? So these are just fundamental Jewish ideas. but they have such an impact in a relationship with money and wealth.
Wow. You literally answered like 5 of my questions with just one answer, which is, I love that. And you explained it so well. And I know your podcast and your Instagram all focus on all this stuff as well. So I highly recommend everyone check that out. There's something you mentioned, you specifically work with Jewish women, right? Mm-hmm. And something that you were mentioning either in a podcast interview, whatever, I stalked you. You were saying how some women, and you help them with this, think that building a wealthy life will compromise some of their values. And we're talking a lot about values here. But like, what are they worried about? Like, what values do they think money is going to compromise?
I'm trying to think what I may have meant by that, because it doesn't...
You can come up with a new answer.
Yeah. I'm trying to... Well, I'll tell you what I do see a lot. That might be where this is coming from. I do see a lot Jewish women thinking that money's going to corrupt. It's going to corrupt the relationships. It's going to corrupt them on a spiritual level. That money somehow is going to taint them. I even had a student one time who told me, this is so mind-blowing to me because I've never thought to pray for money. Like, I have no qualms in praying for health, for shalom bayit, for nachas, for children. Yeah. But money, Yael, like you're opening that kind of word. It feels so uncomfortable. And I'm like, but it's right there. Like, but they just instituted in the sitter. Also, there's this notion, like, if I pray for money, right, then number one, it means I'm a greedy person, which is not true. Number two, then it means it's at the expense of something else, right? So that may be what you heard me say.
Oh, interesting.
Right? It's at the expense of something else. No. Why are you limiting God? Why are you limiting God? And look at it; it's right there. You're praying for all of it, for the health, for the wealth, for the nachas. People come back and say, "Oh, but there were tzaddikim and there were stories." And I've talked about this to many rabbis on the podcast. Like, don't make calculations for God. Why he did that to the couple in the story of the Baal Shem Tov. To you, the reality is you are living with an infinite God. Don't you go limiting him because of... No, you don't put limits on God. You don't put limits on God. You don't go around saying, oh, you know what, God, I'll take just enough air today so I can take a few breaths. Or I'll take just enough water just so I can wash a few dishes and take a shower. Like, no, you want all the air. You want all of the water. You want all the love. You don't say, I'll just take a little bit of love, just enough to, or I'll just take a little bit of creativity just so I can get by these podcast interview today. No, all the creativity I need for my day. You know what I mean? So why do we do that with money exactly?
Wow. What an interesting perspective. I mean, it's interesting that I'm saying perspective because it's really how we should be thinking. But I think it's like years and years of being trained a different way.
There's no ickiness in Jewish. Yeah. There's no ichsa in the Torah about money. In fact, the patriarchs were very wealthy. The Nevi'im the prophets were very wealthy. David HaMelech, Moshe Rabbeinu, very wealthy individuals. We went into Mitzrayim with a promise of wealth given to our patriarch Avram. We left Mitzrayim with a tremendous amount of wealth, and then we acquired more at the splitting of the sea. What was all that wealth for? We were going into a desert. Everything was going to be laundered. We were going to get bread from heaven. Like, what exactly was the wealth for? Oh, it was to build a home for the Creator in this world. We're learning about that in these, this Torah portion, right? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that what we're doing till today? Till today, what we do every day from the moment we wake up is make a dwelling place for God in this physical world. So money's not a bad thing. Money's exactly what we need. In Judaism, we don't you need to have that beautiful house to have the guests and make them comfortable. You need to have that money to buy the beautiful flowers for your Shabbat table. Like, there's so much good that we do with it, and we're supposed to do with it, right? We can go on and on and on. So again, Judaism doesn't see it as bad. It sees it as a very important resource that we have to have a very healthy relationship with it.
When you were talking, I was like, wow, she's really reframing the conversation, but you're actually not. You're just having the conversation because it's not talked about at all, right? To reframe something, it needs to be part of the conversation, and you're just bringing out the conversation, which is even, more amazing.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Well, which is the name of the podcast, right? TrailBLAZER.
Yeah,
because you're opening a path for these conversations that has not existed yet.
Yeah, I would like to think so. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I think. So, what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to balance their values and financial success?
Okay, so first of all, listen to the podcast because I'm saying that because it's going to change your
Yeah.
mindset. We have to have this conversation. Just what you just said. You have to start hearing it, and you'll be like, "Oh, that's mine. That's my inheritance. That's really the way I should think." Like I said, we live in a world of exile. Yes, we have been tainted by other ways of looking at money. So it's time to stop that. It's time
Yeah.
to read the books, listen to the podcast, have the conversation, subscribe to the newsletter, and then on a more general level, yes, be in my world, but also take the things that I said to heart. Start giving Meister properly. You don't know how to do it? Call me. I have a class on it. You're not communicating with your spouse about money properly? Go on those money dates. Download my 10 tips for money date success so that you can do it and succeed at this relationship. It'll help you tremendously improve your relationship with money, improve your relationship with your husband, to share with your husband. I heard this podcast is such a new perspective. I hadn't heard it before. Wow. Open the Tanya. It talks so much. Like, there's so many things you can do. Learn Shara Bitachon, probably even more fundamental before you even open. Like, learn Shara Bitachon, learn the gate of trust. I make an effort to teach it every week for years. Thursday night I teach it to women in English. Wednesday nights I teach it in Spanish. So these are just, these three pillars I think are definitely fundamental. And obviously, like I said, I have many resources to help with that. Like, I have the Bitachon class for women, completely free, you can subscribe. I have the 10 dates for money date success, and I have the art of Jewish giving to teach us how to actually give, because many of us, we're very, very generous people, by the way. It's in our DNA. But if we actually did an accounting of how we give, we're way under that 10%. Just like we underestimate how much we spend when we use our credit cards, or we pay digitally, right? We actually tend to overestimate how much we give. So there's an art to doing this, and once you do it, it really is the key to wealth, and also to, like I said before, to learning other good habits regarding money management.
Your website is amazing. You have so much on there.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I try to make these things light and fun, and
yeah, you have a great personality.
Thank you. But that's what I want it to be like that, because again, God doesn't want us to be stressed about this. He really doesn't. He's not giving us a blessing for it to become something that destroys us. You know what I mean? So we just have to learn to relate to it in a healthy way. Just like he doesn't give us a body for us to have an unhealthy relationship with it. He gives us a body because it's an important tool for your soul to do what it's meant to do. There's so much here that we can repair, and the relationship can be changed. I'm telling you, Judaism does it.
It's so beautiful. So, yeah, I know why I brought you on to the Trailblazer pod. I know why I think you're a trailblazer, and I talked a little bit about it, but I always ask my guests at the end what being a trailblazer means to them.
Oh my gosh, what a question. I think a trailblazer to me boils down to really aligning with your soul and your soul mission, and not keeping it to yourself, but taking it out. Because again, we're meant here to do something in this world that God put us. That's why we're here. And a lot of us fumble and don't, it takes us a long time to discover what that is. A trailblazer to me is somebody that takes that inner work very seriously, and is constantly in that journey of how am I going to be today in alignment and of service to the world. I think that's what it means to me.
I love it. I love that answer. Yael, thank you so much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you for the invitation.